What if a political dispute, maybe something behind the scenes, threatened to just, well, dismantle decades of scientific progress, and maybe even change humanity's future among the stars?
Yeah, or closer to home, imagine just turning off the systems, the satellites, that monitor the health of our own planet, things we kind of rely on every day.
It sounds dramatic, but that's actually a very real possibility being discussed right now. Welcome, everyone, to this deep dive.
Glad you could join us. We're unpacking some really intense and, frankly, kind of alarming news. It's all about these proposed deep cuts to NASA's budget.
And the really heated debate that's flared up around the future direction of the U.S. space program, it feels like a real turning point, possibly.
It really does. We've been going through a lot of sources for you articles, laying out these budget changes, the political tensions that are reportedly involved.
Right. And these stark warnings that are coming from, scientists, policy experts, even the communities whose livelihoods are tied to the agency.
So our mission today is really to guide you through this. It's complex. We want to pull out the essential stuff what's actually being proposed. Why is it causing so much alarm?
Yeah, and what could it really mean? Not just for, rockets and astronauts, but for basic science, for how we understand Earth, even for how nations work together in space.
Okay, so let's get into it. Because the numbers alone are pretty jarring. The scale we're talking about here is big.
It's huge. A proposed nearly 25% slash to NASA's overall budget.
Yeah, taking it from about $24.8 billion this year down to a proposed $18.8 billion.
And to really get what that means, you have to look back, right?
Exactly. Adjusted for inflation, that $18.8 billion, it would be the lowest NASA budget since 1961.
1961. Just think about that for a second. That's before the Apollo program even sent people to the moon.
Right. It puts it in perspective. It's drastic, rolling funding back to the very, very early days of human spaceflight.
And it's not just trimming around the edges, is it? The sources say savings are planned pretty much across the board.
Yeah, widespread, affecting most sectors, almost every part of what NASA does.
And we see the real-world impact, the human cost spelled out, like the potential loss of over 550 full-time jobs just at the NASA Glenn Research Center in Ohio.
That's nearly half their workforce, from almost 1,400 down to just over 800 people.
Yeah. One source we read called it a gut punch for Northeast Ohio.
Yeah.
Didn't pull any punches.
No. And space advocates quoted in the same piece, they used even stronger language, calling these cuts an extinction-level event for science, research, and education, outreach in hundreds of local economies.
Extinction-level event. Wow. That's incredibly strong. It suggests this isn't just a temporary setback, but something that could, permanently damage certain areas.
It really captures the depth of the concern, doesn't it? The perceived threat to the long-term survival of some programs and, the skills built up around them.
Okay, so if the impact is potentially that severe, what's the reasoning? What's the White House's stated rationale for this kind of, radical shift?
Right, there has to be an objective. So a NASA statement mentioned in one article says the budget request aims to, quote, align science and technology portfolios to missions essential for the exploration of the moon and Mars.
Align. So focus things more narrowly.
That's the idea on the surface. The one analyst, Dr. Adam Baker, puts it a bit differently. He's quoted in a source suggesting the administration is basically repurposing NASA.
Repurposing it for what, specifically?
For two main goals, according to his view. Landing astronauts on the moon before the Chinese do, and planting a U.S. flag on Mars. Everything else, secondary.
Okay, so a very focused, almost Apollo-like mission.
And that's exactly the argument supporters make. They say this focus is what NASA needs, like the clear goal of beating the Soviets to the moon back in the day.
Right, and some sources also reflect this other viewpoint, that maybe NASA has become, a bit bloated over the years, unfocused, going over budget.
Exactly. That viewpoint suggests NASA wastes taxpayer money, and this focus brings back discipline, a clear purpose.
Okay, so that's the official line, the supporting argument's clear mission, Moon and Mars first. But the sources also dig into the political context, right? Suggesting maybe there's more going on here than just strategy.
Yes, and this is where it gets, messy. And adds, as one source put it, exacerbated uncertainty. Several articles point to this reported dispute between the president and Elon Musk.
Over a spending bill, wasn't it? But how does that affect NASA?
Well, hugely, potentially. Because NASA relies heavily on SpaceX, Musk's company, for ISS resupply right now, and crucially, for future Moon and Mars plans.
Oh.
And the sources say the president reportedly threatened to pull federal contracts with SpaceX during this dispute. That casts a big shadow over NASA's whole strategy if they're planning to rely so much on SpaceX.
So a political disagreement with a major private partner could actually destabilize NASA's core plans.
That's the implication. It injects political risk right into the heart of their proposed new model. And then there's another layer. One source, from Cleveland.com specifically, presents a viewpoint suggesting these cuts might fit into, a bigger picture.
What kind of picture?
It's described in the article as potentially being part of a war on science and intellectual pursuits.
Wow.
Yeah, the article mentions other examples, like criticism aimed at universities, and quotes one person, Chris Quinn, observing that to some folks, it just looks like the administration is, quote, against intelligence and science.
Okay, but we need to be really clear here. This is a specific viewpoint, an interpretation presented in one of the sources we looked at. It's giving context to the political climate.
Absolutely crucial point. We're reporting what the sources say. And that same source offers a suggested motivation, again, presenting a perspective, that these cuts reflect a lack of foresight, a failure to see down the road. The perspective offered in the piece is that it's about a single-minded focus on certain goals, like, say, tax cuts for the wealthy, maybe without much concern for the casualties that might result. That's Layla Tassi quoting that viewpoint.
So a really complex political backdrop, potential disputes with partners, perceptions of a broader anti-science agenda. It's not just about budget numbers.
That definitely seems to be a key theme running through the analysis.
Right.
And the shift in focus, it also involves a major shift towards relying much, much more on private companies, doesn't it? Especially for launch.
Right. This is where the plan to phase out NASA's big rocket, the SLS, comes in, the Space Launch System.
Exactly, SLS. The sources describe it as, delayed, way over budget, costing something like $4.1 billion per launch.
$4.1 billion per launch. Ouch.
Yeah. So the proposals suggest phasing it out, replacing it with private rockets.
Specifically, SpaceX's reusable Starship, they estimate maybe $100 million a launch, and Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin New Glenn rocket promising similar savings.
On paper, those cost savings look amazing. You can see the appeal.
Always a but, isn't there?
There is. The sources raise some big risks, big concerns about putting all the eggs in those private baskets right now. Dr. Simeon Barber is quoted, worrying NASA might be jumping out of the frying pan into the fire.
Okay, so what's the fire in this case?
The worry is that developing these rockets, Starship and New Glenn, it's mostly being bankrolled by Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos right now.
Right. Their personal fortunes, essentially.
And the sources highlight, what if they lose their appetite? This stuff is incredibly hard and expensive. Or what if they just need more money than they want to personally sink into it to actually get these things working reliably for NASA?
Then Congress might end up having to pay anyway.
That's the fear. Congress might be forced to step in, provide funding, and maybe those projected savings just evaporate.
And technically, these rockets aren't quite ready for prime time yet, are they? Starship's had those spectacular development mishaps.
Right. Unsuccessful launches. And Blue Origin is really only just starting to test its moon rocket system.
So it's a big bet, a potentially risky bet on future tech and the sustained commitment of private billionaires, replacing a government system that, okay, might be flawed and expensive, but at least it works and is under government control.
That sums up the tension pretty well. And this bet, this pivot to Moon and Mars via private partners, it seems to come at a really severe cost to other vital NASA work. Science, research, collaboration.
Yeah, this is where it gets really concerning for a lot of scientists reading through the sources. The potential loss of 40 science missions. 40.
And what's really striking, as the articles point out, is that this includes many missions already operating in space. Think Mars orbiters, probes exploring Jupiter, asteroids.
Wait, so missions that are already up there, missions that we've already spent years and millions, probably billions, developing and launching.
Exactly. The big costs, development and launch, are already sunk costs. The proposed savings are mostly from cutting the relatively small operational budgets needed to keep them running, collecting data, analyzing it.
That sounds incredibly short-sighted, like building a library and then firing all the librarians to save on salaries.
It feels like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Or building that amazing telescope and then deciding not to, pay the electricity bill to keep the camera running. And the impact on Earth observation programs is highlighted as particularly critical.
The ones watching our own planet.
Right. Dr. Adam Baker calls them the canary in the coal mine for Earth's health. He warns that turning off this early warning system could seriously cripple our ability to predict and deal with climate change impacts. He calls it a frightening prospect.
An early warning system for sea level rise, deforestation, ice melt, extreme weather. Turning that off doesn't sound like a future risk. It sounds like an immediate one.
It's a direct hit to gathering essential data about the only planet we have. And beyond Earth science, these proposals could really damage international collaboration. That's been a bedrock of space exploration for decades.
How so?
The sources point to threats to partnerships with the European Space Agency, ESA, specifically endangering the huge Mars sample return mission.
Bringing bits of Mars back. Wow.
Yeah, a massive joint effort. And the Rosalind Franklin rover mission, too. Both potentially on the chopping block or severely impacted.
Those sound like flagship science missions.
They are, and they depend on these deep partnerships.
Yeah.
Then there's the risk of losing access to the International Space Station if the U.S. winds down its support as proposed.
Right.
And canceling NASA's contributions to the planned successor, the multinational Lunar Gateway Station around the Moon, it's like pulling back from shared global efforts across the board.
There was that interesting European perspective, though, from Professor Sir Martin Sweeting.
Oh, right. He was quoted saying that while the U.S. cuts aren't welcome, obviously it might actually push Europe to step up more. By encouraging Europe to take more responsibility, build up its own independent space capability. Basically, positioning Europe to be a strong partner with or without NASA.
Interesting. So these U.S. cuts could actually reshape the global balance of power in space.
It really could. And domestically, there's also this concern about a potential brain drain. Remember, Chris Quinn was quoted, noting that some observers see the smartest scientists fleeing the country.
Being welcomed by other nations looking to boost their own programs.
Exactly. Welcomed by nations eager for that expertise, leading to this drain our brains scenario, as Quinn put it.
So you don't just turn off missions, you risk losing the people who make them possible now and in the future. That seems incredibly counterproductive.
It's a huge concern about losing decades of built-up knowledge and talent. And like we talked about with NASA, Glenn, it specifically hits critical research areas: aeronautics, propulsion, communications tech, energy systems, stuff with benefits way beyond just spaceflight.
Okay, so it's a grim picture in many ways.
Yeah.
But where are we right now? These are proposed cuts, right? Not law yet.
That is the crucial thing to remember. The proposals sent to Congress, they haven't been approved. And the sources do say there are signs of pushback.
Like what?
Well, local leaders in places like Ohio near NASA Glenn, they're pushing back hard. And Casey Dreyer from the Planetary Society is quoted saying many Republicans have privately indicated they're ready to vote against these cuts as proposed.
Okay, so there's hope maybe Congress rejects this. What's the main worry, then, about the process?
The biggest fear highlighted isn't necessarily that Congress likes the cuts, but political gridlock. You know how things can get stuck.
Right, budget battles.
Yeah. If they fail to agree on a budget by the deadline, the reduced White House proposal could theoretically just get put in place as an interim measure, a continuing resolution at the lower level.
And the worry is, once that happens, even temporarily,
It could be really, really hard to reverse, and the damage could be done quickly.
because of the uncertainty, the delay.
Exactly. The sources really stress this. Once you turn off a complex space mission, once you disband the expert teams, you often can't just flip a switch and start it back up later. It's not that simple.
Right.
Dr. Simeon Barber said this uncertainty is already having a chilling impact on the human space program. It hits morale, makes planning impossible, and fuels that brain drain we mentioned. People leave for more stable ground.
So even the threat of these cuts, the uncertainty itself, causes damage.
It really seems to. That whole ecosystem, the tech, the people, the global partnerships, it's fragile. It takes decades to build. It can be damaged much faster.
Okay, let me pull this together. What's the main takeaway here, the core tension we've explored from these sources?
I think what's really striking is how these proposed cuts aren't just about saving money. They represent a potential, really fundamental shift in NASA's direction, a deliberate pivot.
A pivot towards
Very specific crewed missions, Moon. Then Mars relying heavily on private companies. And it seems to explicitly deprioritize this huge established portfolio of Earth science, planetary science, basic research, and those long-standing international partnerships.
So it's not just a trim, it's a strategic choice. And one that, according to the sources, risks dismantling decades of work and relationships.
That's the heart of the debate. It forces this really fundamental question about what the U.S. space program should be doing in the 21st century.
Which leads to a question for you listening right now as Congress debates this. What do you think is most critical? What should the U.S. space program prioritize?
Is that narrow focus on Moon and Mars, leaning heavily on private rockets, worth the potential cost? The cost to climate research, to broader science, to America's role as a global partner in exploration?
It's a really tough calculation, isn't it? With huge potential consequences based on everything we've read. The risks seem very real.
They certainly do. The path forward is definitely unclear, and the stakes, well, they feel incredibly high. It impacts not just where humans go next, but what we understand about our own planet and how we collaborate or don't with the rest of the world.
A lot to think about indeed.
Definitely, as Congress takes up these budget numbers.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the proposed NASA budget cuts and this whole intense debate swirling around them.
Hope it was useful.
If you found this exploration valuable, please do subscribe so you don't miss our future deep dives. We really try to unpack these complex issues, and we genuinely love to hear what stood out to you from this discussion. Feel free to share your thoughts on what you think the priorities for space should be.